Hola Diana,
Hello, Luz.
¿cómo estás?
Bien, ¿cómo va todo?
Bien, Diana, mucho calor.
Sí, pero yo te he dicho que nos mandes un poquito que aquí hace mucho frío.
Me estoy muriendo de calor, no te imaginas. Ay.
No, y nosotros acá con esos vientos y ese frío.
No, aquí está venteando rico. Claro que hace muchos daños, especialmente al café le hace mucho daño esos vientos, qué pesar.
Se daña más.
Claro, se daña y se cae el grano, entonces se aporrea.
Mm.
Y los incendios.
Ah, sí, eso sí está terrible. Ese
A mi
problema.
esposo se le incendió el beneficiadero de café el sábado por la noche por los vientos. Estaban secando el café
Sí,
a las 5:30 de la tarde y el viento movió una chispa y se incendio.
se dañó todo. Todo el
Todo, se dañó el beneficiadero, se quemó todo el café, la pasilla, todo.
Ay, Diosito. Pero estaba asegurado.
Mm, sí, estaba asegurado, gracias a Dios, pero imagínate, eso fue el sábado y está la hora en que no ha podido mandar a arreglar nada, ni los hilos, ni nada, porque los bomberos no le han dado un certificado.
Mm,
Entonces,
está demorado.
pero bueno, pero bueno.
¿El beneficiario se usa solamente para secar?
No, para lavar también lo lavan. Primero lo lavan y luego lo secan y lo tuestan.
Ok, todo eso se hace en el beneficiario.
Todo eso se hace en el beneficiario.
Ya. Mm.
Entonces, y acá en Pereira el calor es horrible, no te imaginas.
¿Qué te toca usar? ¿Una aire acondicionado o una...
Yo no puedo, Diana, porque yo soy rinítica. Entonces a
Ah,
mí un aire acondicionado me mata,
sí,
me
yo
mata.
también.
Entonces no, un abanico y ropa fresca nomás.
Yo tengo lo mismo y sí, es muy complicado con esas alergias.
Mm,
Ok.
yo soy muy alérgica. Hola
Jairo,
Jairo.
Alejandra, welcome.
Hello, teacher. How are you?
Good. We were having a short conversation while we had more students in the encounter. How
Yeah.
was your day?
It's been long and still to go. It hasn't ended, but
Okay.
it's been pretty good.
What do you usually do after the encounter, after this encounter?
The well, I spend some time with my daughter, but then I get to work on school stuff. There's a dozen things that you should do in school, and somehow things manage to get you on a detour. And at the end of the day, out of the five, six, seven things you had to do, you didn't do all of them. So I'm usually working on school stuff.
Okay. So what time do you usually go to bed?
10:30, maybe 11.
Okay. Because I guess you have to go or to start classes at 7 or 8 at school.
Well, the thing, our lessons start quarter after 7. I mean, for students, but teachers and school staff, we gotta be there quarter to 7. So they're picking me up at quarter to 6. It means that I'm leaving home around 5:30, which means I wake up around 4:30.
Gosh.
So days are very long here.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why. Working at a school is difficult. It's a lot
It
of
is.
work uh, and long hours.
I can't think of a day that I get home and say, you know what, I've completed all my tasks and I have nothing to do after school. I'm
That doesn't
usually
happen.
working, yes.
Yeah. Well, that's why we have more vacation days than other professionals. We really work really, really hard, more hours than other professionals. So we have more vacation days.
Right. The thing is we coordinators, we don't have as many days of vacation as teachers. But in general terms, we do okay. Yeah, we have some rest, and that's enough, I guess.
Okay. Well, I guess you got used to it finally. You got used to that lifestyle.
Yes, yes. Eventually, eventually, you do now. There's some very specific times during the year that are really pressing and time consuming and energy consuming. But yes, as you say, in general terms, you get used to the rhythm and the pace. And sometimes, actually, when you have nothing to do, you feel strange. Like what am I doing?
Yeah, like you are wasting your time.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody to the encounter.
Thank you, teacher.
Hello, teacher. Good evening to everyone.
Hi, teacher.
Hello.
Hi.
Well, this week you started new readings about neuroeducation, right? So that means that our encounter tonight is the last one related to the topic of social linguistics. Um, so we're going to review what you read last week for task 4, which was about multilingual societies and multilingual discourse. Um, why do you think it's important to reflect about discourse in our field? Why is it important to read about discourse to try to understand that what happens when in different societies?
Well, I guess
Yes, Jairo.
I mean, we're language teachers, and as language teachers, we should be aware of the power that language has. I mean, the implications of actually teaching a language is not only about the linguistic aspect of the language in terms of like the linguistic elements, like the competences. So teaching a language is teaching a tool that can carry in itself power, ideology, it's got culture, it's got social aspects. So, studying social linguistics and especially analyzing these courses is a way for us to be very aware and sometimes cautious about how we teach this tool, how we teach this competence, how we empower students to not only to know a language, but to use it well, to communicate well, to use power well, to use how do you say that? Okay, to be fair with language, to be assertive. So I guess as language teachers, we should really understand what language means in general terms, as for the conditions it has, as for the impact it may have, not only at an individual level but as a group level, and the ideology that you can convey sometimes, even if you're not aware of it, your beliefs and your values and pretty much yourself. I mean, your own self. So, but I guess it's different from teaching mathematics and from teaching science. Uh, you don't usually transfer your beliefs openly through a multiplication, whereas this language is very easy. And actually, I don't know if I may say easy, or actually something that you cannot avoid. Every time you talk is a representation, it is a connection with the world. So being aware of these things help you out going into a classroom. And once again, once we were talking about isolating students, once we were talking about empowering a certain group in the classroom, just because you're using a very specific set of words or examples or a very specific discourse. So I guess it's all about being careful, understanding what it is. It is more than actually a code. It's many things.
Very good, Jairo. Yes. So we need to help students to be assertive, right? Very good. Somebody else wants to add something?
Teacher, me.
Catalina?
Teacher, I guess if we know about sociolinguistics, we can explain to students why people speak differently in every country. Even though they are speaking like the same language, like the same English, for example, why it sounds different, why the grammar sometimes is different, why they have like those different dialects. And for us, it's going to be easier to explain that kind of thing. Also, if they see us like motivated with the English and with the hurry that we need to learn a new language, they're going to be the same way too. So they're going to be more perceptive on how we teach the class, and perhaps they want to take the class and they want to learn the English or the Spanish or French or whatever language they are in.
Mm-hmm. All right. So that also helps them to become aware of our differences in when we use Spanish here and the differences that exist
Yeah,
also in our
it's like
society, right?
being a little bit more, it's like being a little bit more like tolerant on the different accents and aspects of the language.
Okay, good. Somebody else? Um, have any of you read or, yeah, read the Common European Framework reference?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Have you noticed that there are competences regarding social linguistics and pragmalinguistics?
Right. They explain the communicative competence, which is, I think it's chapter 5, which deals with the description of the competences. And they say the communicative competence, which is the ultimate goal of learning a language, is divided in 3 different competences, right? The linguistic competence, the social linguistic competence, and the pragmatic competence. And then they make a whole in-depth description of each one of the scales and standards that belong to each one of them. So it's actually for you to be able to achieve communicative competence in a language, you should develop first linguistic, social linguistic, and pragmatic competences.
Exactly. So you know that in Colombia we use that theory um, to plan classes and to organize information for the courses, for English courses. So the books that we use in Colombia are designed taking into account those that information that is in the Common European Framework. It means that sometimes we disregard the idea that we need to teach students also to become aware of sociolinguistic and pragmalinguistic aspects. And we tend to help students learn that the language has a structure and they need to learn some vocabulary, but we disregard sometimes the idea of helping them to become aware of those differences in society in order for them to be competent when they speak, so they can be assertive when they communicate with other people in different situations. So that's why that's important to take a look at these aspects regarding social linguistics and in other courses, pragmalinguistics too. Okay, what do you guys remember about multilingual societies? What's that? What's the characteristic?
It's like the society that speaks more than one language.
Exactly. Yes. So you know that America was colonized by different um, by Europeans from different parts. So from by Portuguese, by Dutch people, by English people, by French people. So in some islands, it is common to have more than one language that is spoken in that area. So it's when more than two languages are spoken in that region, in that area, for that society. And sometimes there are some ideologies concerning those languages that are spoken there. Um, for the colonization, we already know that there were people living in the Americas before the countries, the European people came to colonize the area. So there are indigenous languages, but also a mixture also sometimes of languages of people who speak Creole in some islands. And there are some ideologies regarding the language that is spoken and let's say the position of people who speak each one of the languages. So, what do you remember about that topic of ideologies regarding different languages spoken in one society?
I think what I most like remember about is about how people are afraid to get involved in another language because they think they're gonna change the culture, and they are more afraid like of belonging to a new one because they have to start doing and some behaviors that they didn't have before.
All right, so that's part of, that's one ideology that the community, for example, indigenous communities might have regarding asking their inhabitants or the people in their communities to learn a language different to the one that they have in their tribes. So that's one. Which is other ideology that can be part of the multilingual societies.
Teacher, perhaps when we talk about like a certain racism, which means like some are gonna feel inferior than others.
Exactly. Mhm. So people in some societies think that the ones that speak the language that is the dominant one, I mean the one that is spoken by most of the people, um, have some privileges or belong to a certain type of class in the society, so that the people who speak the language that is spoken by just a few members of the society have less privileges and are, like as you say, as you mentioned, discriminated because they are a minority. So that's other ideology. So that if you remember the book, the chapter mentioned that some people who speak indigenous languages in Mexico might not feel that proud of knowing that language because of the way the rest of the society looks at them, or what the rest of the society thinks about um, about them. Okay, so and there are also some stereotypes that are evidence in the words that are used to express the idea of using a language not as a native person. So maybe you read or you remember about the word Spanglish, which means that a person that speaks English and Spanish, but not in a not like a native person that speaks English. So there are also other words that are used to um, to mark that stereotype. So as Spanglish, which are the other words that are used to express that idea of a person who doesn't speak well the language.
Besides the Spanglish?
Yes.
Mm, perhaps a person who does a lot of movement with the hands.
No, but the words like Spanglish, there are
Words
others.
like
Yes, words like that one.
um, eh, give me another example, please.
Frañol, for example, to mention that a person speaks French and like
Oh,
a
okay.
mixture of Spanish.
Oh, okay.
We have
But in
here,
French and English, for example, in the Franglish,
which one?
French and English, when they say they're speaking Franglish.
Okay, yeah. And Tex-Mex to mean that the person is from Mexico and is trying to speak English also.
So, teacher, hi. It would be the same for the Chinglish and Singlish, which is Singaporean English, then? The same concept?
Yeah,
Or Hinglish? Okay.
exactly. So that's a way to stereotype the person who speaks that language. To mean that the way they are speaking is not exactly as a native person from the USA or from Great Britain, that it has some elements that make it different, but it's a way that is not, it's kind of pejorative because it's not a, it doesn't have a positive load to mean that the person is doing it correctly.
But the stereotypes is when maybe we or well people can mix two languages or more. Is
Is
that
the stereotype is when we want to put in a to categorize something because it's different. So we do that all the time because differences are everywhere all the time. So humans, we try to understand differences by categorizing the things and saying, okay, the people who speak Spanish and English and have a different accent, Mexican accent, so that they speak Tex-Mex. Yeah, so they are gonna be in this category because they have certain characteristics. So it's like to give a name to that difference and try to put that in a category or in a group because it's
Okay.
all right. And then the reading will also mention the idea of shift language and shift maintenance. What's that about?
The language shift is the like the language transfer or the language replacement?
It's the decision the person makes regarding what language is going to use in the place. So if you shift from Spanish into English, or if you keep talking the language that was spoken in the place that was colonized.
So then that means that we should be talking some type of Quechua and some type of other language because well, Spanish was the one that colonized Colombia.
All right, yeah. So if there are indigenous communities still in Colombia, so they have a language maintenance. So they keep talking the language that was originally spoken by their communities. They didn't, they decided not to use the language spoken by the majority that was colonized.
Oh, okay.
So here it says that it's used in a scenario of immigration or conquest. So that it also has a load of or is connected with social classes and the dominance and that the language represents. So if most of people use it, um, it helps in many of the interactions that people have in that society. So if if a community just want to keep the other languages is regarded as um, the ones that are not dominant in that society and the ones that have less value or less power. So that's why it says in the readings that concept is connected with a situation of immigration or conquest. So when people needs to decide which language is gonna use, if the one is spoken by most of the people in the society because of the process of um, of conquest, or in the immigration situation in the case of people who arrive, for example, nowadays from Africa to Europe. So if they are gonna change their language to the one of the place where they arrive, they are gonna speak Italian or German or French, the language that of the place where they start living after they immigrate. Okay, then we have other idea that is related to the the level of or the level of knowledge in both languages. So we will always have to take into account that a person might be more competent in one language than in the other. So it can vary um, in a multilingual society. And we had also the concept of diglossia. What's that about?
A linguistic phenomenon.
Is a linguistic phenomenon related to what?
Is the existence that two codes or varieties of language in the same territory or in the same community. And one of the language is it's, it's more official than the other or predominant than the other.
Right. And what's other characteristics of diglossia?
Um, well, the main characteristic is both languages are used, but they have different uses depending of the situation.
Uh-huh. For example,
Mm, for example, my group of my from my work, I keep continue to talk in other contexts the same language.
that is more connected with the idea of power. And again, in a situation of in a place or in a country um, where two different varieties are spoken. For example, have you heard about
Could
Palenque?
be formal.
The
Palenque,
Arabic,
yes.
Okay, you know that
Yes.
where is that place?
Palenque in Bolívar,
Exactly,
yes,
in Bolivar,
near
right?
to Cartagena. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't remember.
And what language is spoken there?
The name, I don't know, is African language.
Yeah, so they have some
Variety is not exactly African, but they have a variety. Variety.
a variety.
Yes.
So exactly. So although they belong to Colombia, and most of people in Colombia speak Spanish. They maintain their language and they use it for in that region. They use it for their interactions among them. But Palenque, the language that is spoken in Palenque, San Basilio de Palenque, is not regarded as the one that has the power or the one that is using the books or the one that is taught in most of the schools. So is connected with the idea that is used for a minority group for interactions about cultural aspects or social aspects regarding their family situations. So that has that connotation. Diglossia has the connotation that there is a variety that is spoken by the dominant group, by the majority, that is the one that is used for most of the transactions and the interactions and the um, for speeches at schools, for for the government, for decisions, and that is the one that is, let's say, um, the one that is considered the main language in the country. While the other one is considered that has a less value and is used for less important aspects, for less important situations. So diglossia has a value uh, of power there, and also of discrimination too. Um, and then the reading showed an example that also happens like here in San Basilio de Palenque in Haiti. There is a similar situation. So Haitians speak Creole, but the language that is what's the word? The language that is the official language is French, right? But the communities speak Haitian Creole, which is the one that has the connection with their history and with the Africans that were taken to that island. But it also has that value of the language that is spoken for less important uh, situations in the island. Do you guys know about any other example of the
In
glossary?
Teacher, Arabic, I
Uh-huh.
think the standard language is Arabic, but they have like dialects or different accents in different places. But the standard language, the official language is Arabic.
Okay. So the other ones,
And I want to ask you about Catalan.
uh-huh.
Could be Catalan an example of dysglossia, teacher?
Yes, they belong. People who speak that language are in the same country where Spanish is spoken, but the dominant language is Spanish.
Okay. Great.
So the
Thank you,
people
teacher.
who speak the other language, the other variety, are regarded as people who have less power and less power in general. So if we Google, for example, Spain, we won't find that there is that the official language or that they consider that Catalan is spoken there because the one that has the power is Spanish, the variety that has power and that is considered the official one.
Okay, teacher. Thanks.
Okay, any other example?
What about in India? That they speak so many dialects depending on the. Well, I read that certain places where you pass by, but they're all able to communicate in English most of the time. But there are a lot of places that have dialects.
Exactly. That's also an example of diglossia.
Okay.
If we Google, we will find that in India the official language is English, that there are many other varieties.
Maybe San Andres also, no?
Right. So San Andres is also an example. The language that is spoken there is
Creole?
Creole, and there is also another one. I forget at this moment. But yes, that's an example. Good. Now, what about the concept of code switching? What's that?
Can I?
Teacher, is when you alternate between two or more languages in a conversation.
Mhm. Is that good or is that bad? In our let's say in an immersion school in Colombia?
It could be good
I don't think it's that good.
because probably it makes to feel a student more confident when they want to express something. So they can switch.
Okay, so because it can help them to be more confident. Catalina, what do you think? Is that good or bad?
No, I don't think it's good because like when you go to another country, there's no way you can do a switch. Like they won't understand you, so you have to do the effort to get yourself understood because people are not gonna know what you're talking about. So I think it's a huge mistake, for example, here in the kindergarten when they teach the kids, for example, the colors and they say to the kid, repeat, yellow, amarillo, red, rojo. They are getting that into mind, and when you ask them, they just repeat it like that, and they don't know the difference. Okay, this is English and this is Spanish. And if they go, for example, to the United States and they say rojo, red, they're gonna say, what are you talking about? So I don't think it's that good.
Okay.
I
What
have a
about,
question,
uh-huh.
but I can agree with Catalina to some point. But I also, what about if you're in school, you're given an assignment, the kid doesn't understand the instruction because he just can't process it. But if you tell him in Spanish, he understands and then he's able to produce. For example, write about your last vacation and tell us why it was such a wonderful idea. And he doesn't understand that part. He understands that he has to write about something. But if you give him the instruction clearly, then in Spanish, then I don't see that as a bad situation. You're just clarifying for the kid to understand.
Mm-hmm.
But
That's
then
a
you can use the tools and examples, because my concern is when, so when, for example, a foreigner goes to another country. Let's say because I'm working, I have to go and live in Europe. What are gonna do my kids if they are used to do that switch? In Europe, they're not gonna talk to them. Well, let's say Germany. They're not gonna talk to them in Spanish. They're gonna go directly to the German.
okay, but that's let's say that that's a different context. So in your example, Catalina, you're talking about the context of being in a different country where English is spoken. So in that context, there is no way to switch because the person is not going to understand. Well, usually,
Okay, but and if a teacher, like a foreigner teacher, comes here, for example, in school, if you have a teacher that only speaks English and no Spanish, what do you do then?
mhm. Okay, that's possible. Yeah. So, but let's discuss like in the context of the immersion schools here. So, it can be a possibility that in an immersion school in Colombia, students might have a teacher from North America or from England, so that the person doesn't speak Spanish and it's not possible to give an explanation in the Spanish for students. So the teacher would need to use other strategies to make herself understood and to help the students understand. But in general, so some ideas like the one that is was mentioned by Luz, that it could help students to feel more confident, or like Leonardo's ideas that the use of Spanish sometimes in the context of an immersion school in Colombia could help with the process of understanding a difficult topic, or to clarify a concept. In that context, so we also have the Catalina's idea of not being able to switch because there is no knowledge about Spanish in the case of a native person that might probably not speak Spanish. What
Yes, but
other?
Sorry, teacher.
Which other aspects do you consider that could be positive or negative in that context of an immersion school? When switching, when talking about code switch.
Teacher, but people when make that code switching, they made it, well, the volunteer or volunteer way. I mean, if I in a place when there are people from different countries that maybe they spoke different languages, if I have the knowledge, if I have the knowledge about those languages, I have to make that code switching, because how maybe I could go to communicate with other people. So yes or yes, we have to make that code switching.
Yeah, yes, that's a different context. It's a different situation. Let's say in a party where there are people from different countries, so they speak different languages, or let's say in a class, in an English class where there are students from different countries, so that they speak different languages. But in the context of a bilingual and immersion school in Colombia, what do you think, or yes, how, do you think that could be considered positive or negative to code switch? So in Catalina's uh, in Catalina's example, and from her point of view, is not positive because students might get used to code switch, and they might transfer that code switching in a different situation where it won't be possible to continue the communication because the person in other contexts might not have the knowledge of Spanish. In Luz Elena's opinion and Leonardo's opinion, it might have some positive aspects like giving the students more confidence when speaking, or might help them to understand a difficult concept or topic in class.
Well, I think if I go to, I don't know, maybe Canada, I'm going to immersion course, is impossible, or maybe it's difficult to have a code switching, because all of the students that maybe stay in that school, I don't know, we are in that place because we want to learn the second language, for example, in English. If I go to Canada, I don't want, or maybe it's not probably that I'm going to talk with people from, I don't know, Latin America, because I want to improve my English. So I agree with Catalina.
Okay, so in your opinion, it won't help the students to use the language that they would need in other
Yeah.
countries. Okay, Alejandra and Jairo. So, well, Alejandra, I think you also work for an immersion school, and we know that Jairo works for an immersion school. So, in those cases, in your opinion, would you ban students in the case they
Well,
use Spanish?
well, no. There's there's we have a language policy. Okay, let me state a framework. Schools in Colombia they are not allowed to claim themselves to be bilingual anymore. Like 20 years ago, anybody who wanted to found the school and add the word bilingual could do it. Actually, if you go around every school from the past 25 to 15 years were bilingües. Colegio alemán bilingüe, colegio alcaparros bilingüe, colegio bilingües. So there came a resolution in 2008, and the Ministry of Education said, no, 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 wait a minute. you cannot claim yourself to be bilingual. You have to go through a series of checklist items for you to be granted recognition as a bilingual school. Okay, and one of the requirements is for the at least 50% of the curriculum of the instruction to be taught in that second language. So as a bilingual school that has been recognized, and it could be recognized as a national bilingual school or as an international bilingual school, you do have to comply with certain amount of hours of instruction, actual real instruction in the classroom, which is 50% at least. I mean, that's point number one. Point number two, as for the talking about ideology, but more than that is the approach, the teaching approach for languages and bilingualism. There's also different frameworks. So if a school has been declared to be recognized to be a bilingual school, you have to teach at least 50% of the complete program in English. Number two, if you're developing a bilingual program and an approach of communicative approach, for instance, CLT for teaching language, you also have some guidelines as to try and get students use as much time the second language as possible. Number three, uh, bilingual schools need to have a bilingual atmosphere. And bilingual atmosphere has to do with the signs that students and everybody can read, decoration in the classrooms, the radio station, formal station area of school, the web page, and so on and so on. So let's say it's not a matter of banning the use of Spanish. However, school has to make a decision on what subjects should be used in English as the mainstream for instruction and for communication. And as for creating an atmosphere, it's also important for schools to determine, to decide who teachers are supposed to be using the language within school environments. Name it in the classrooms, of course, because it's what you have to use for instruction of your subjects, and on the campus. So what we have as, for example, at Newman School, as the language policy is, if you're teaching one of the subjects that school is formally declaring to be taught in English, you do have to teach it in English. You as teacher, and you gotta promote the use of English within your lessons. However, there are very specific times, moments, and situations within that type of class that students may come to you and use their mother tongue, okay? Name it when they are not feeling okay, when they have to talk about their emotions, when they come to you and you're the home teacher and they're going through a hard time, on where there's been a situation between students. And for instance, with the little ones, that's different according to the age and the level of students. For instance, in fourth grade, students at Newman School take the CAT exam, which is an A2 examination. So it means that students in fourth grade are able to communicate most of their feelings and needs and communicative needs. So they can talk English. Whereas from pre-K, of course, to third grade, they still needs the help of their mother tongue. So students, for instance, in first grade, what they can do is there are some, how can I call it, some cards. And students, when they feel they need to talk in Spanish, when they really need to talk in Spanish, they will go to the teacher's desk and grab the little card. And that's like a passing, it's a pass to use English. Now, the rule is you can take the card only once during the lesson. And you can only use that for about 2 or 3 minutes. Can students speak Spanish? Yes, of course. Only in very specific situations. Now, can they speak in Spanish in all of the other classes and to any other teacher? Of course. So saying that using Spanish is banned is not quite accurate, in the sense of it's not banned to be used in the school. It's not banned to be used in the speaking of, in the classes that are taught in English. But students and teachers are required that whatever they can actually say and express and develop in English, they should do it. That's basically the language policy. But once again, it's requirements, it's expectations, it is approaches.
Okay, good. So, Jairo, what you just mentioned about your experience at school matches the results of the study that you guys read last week about the use of Spanish in an English class. So, if you remember in that study, the results were that students use Spanish when they needed to communicate their emotions or when, as Leonardo mentioned, they had difficulties to understand the concept. So when there was a need that couldn't be or when the English was not possible to help students with the need of communicating that emotion or with the idea of understanding the difficult concept. So, as you mentioned, in your experience at that school, the idea is to push students to use English as much as possible and to understand that during the first levels, like first course, second course, they still don't have the whole knowledge of the language to communicate, so we can be more flexible with those first levels,
So,
with
and
beginners.
teachers at lower levels, I mean, they're trying to use certain strategies. So, for example, if a kid comes to you running and he wants to do it in English, but here he doesn't have the vocabulary, they will usually go for Spanglish, right? So, what the teacher is supposed to do is supposed to not prohibit, I mean, you cannot ban Spanish. I mean, that's going to happen. So teachers should use strategies. So what teachers should do is listen to students. What teachers do, and it's amazing, teachers would rephrase it in English, and it's amazing how students would immediately say exactly the same thing that they said in Spanish or in Spanish, and they would say it in English. And that happens on an everyday basis. I mean, if you go to school, that's happening all the time at lower levels. Students saying some things in English and Spanish, teachers just saying it in English, rephrasing it, and students repeating it again until it just goes, you know? Something that is really funny and it should be studied, it would be nice. You can see students walking down the halls talking to teachers, saying hi, whatever. And they would talk to some teachers in Spanish. And automatically, and this just happens, when they meet their English teacher or whoever teacher of content-based teacher is, they would, I mean, automatically switch to English. And that's really funny. I mean, if there's a Spanish teacher and a content-based teacher, and you can see students are not actually making a decision, it's something that happens. He or she would address this teacher in a language and the other teacher in the other language, and it's just natural.
Mhm.
What I want to say is, talking about bilingual schools in Colombia, as I think Catalina mentioned it, if you openly allow or allow students to make decisions on which language to use, there's no doubt about it. I mean, students will have an unconscious tendency of using Spanish. You know,
Mhm.
that's going to happen. I mean, if when students have talking time to each other in the lessons, they will turn to Spanish. There's nothing you can do. I mean, you cannot be there in every group just telling them, okay, use English, use English. That happens. However, for producing language, for talking about the concepts, for showing performance, for showing evidence of understanding, they should do it in English. But if you don't have these language policies, teacher, students are going to be using Spanish all the time, and they, as Catalina was saying, I mean, provided we were in an English speaking country, we wouldn't worry about it. I mean, just use as much as you can and then go to the world and use English. But that doesn't happen here. Sometimes the only English students use is in school. There's no more English around. So you should really pay attention to that. But we don't ban Spanish. You can't.
Mhm. Right. Well, very good. So what we have to do is to be uh, careful with the beginners because they don't have the whole knowledge of the language, so we can we need to know what they are able to communicate so we can push them to do it in English. And when we know that it's difficult for them, we can be more less strict and allow them to use Spanish, but rephrase it so they get the words that they need for the next time they need to communicate the same idea or a similar idea. So that's the way they get to learn more and more words, more and more English. So we need to be careful about how much we allow students, beginners or pre-intermediate students to use Spanish.
And teacher, can I say something else? And I'm sorry about this.
Yes, yes, Heidi.
Talking about Clio, they say there's 3 different types of language: language for learning, language of learning, and language through learning. The reason why it is important for teachers to talk in English to students out of the classroom, I mean, in the cafeteria, in the playgrounds, on the school bus, and I'm just going to give you an example. We've identified that there is more language, actual real language for communication that students learn out of the classroom than the actual language they learn in the classroom. My daughter, she also studies at a bilingual school, not in the school that I'm working for. So we went to the movies one day, and we just about to enter, and we wanted to buy some popcorn, and then I say, Gabriela, that line is too long. And then automatically she says, that's not a line, that's a bunch of people together. And I'm telling you, I mean, nobody taught her that as part of a class. You know what I'm saying? What I assume is, at one given time, somewhere during the lessons, somebody came out of the classroom and a teacher said that, just said it. I mean, that's not a line, that's a bunch of people together. It's not something that you teach as part of your class. So it's important for teachers to understand that this is not giving more status to English or banning Spanish. But what students can really get, and I would say that the term is picking up the language. I mean, students pick up more language by just listening to teachers talking in English around school than they could actually do in the classroom. And that is one of the things that I've seen.
Yeah, so that's very important. Thanks for reminding me that teachers, English teachers, speak very little Spanish with beginners during the classes with beginners. We should not speak Spanish with advanced students because they have the knowledge to keep the conversation in English in class. But with beginners, we need to be careful about the use of Spanish. If they use it, it's because they don't have the knowledge. But we then, as you mentioned, we rephrase their ideas. We allow them to say their emotions or the sentence that they need to say in Spanish because we know like this difficult structure, it's a difficult idea to say it in English, that we rephrase it so they, by listening to the teacher, as you mentioned, Jairo, they get more and more words, more and more knowledge about the language. So that's important to have in mind the level of the students and also well the level of the students to know when to allow them to code switch or when to help them with the language, and also how difficult is the topic that we are explaining to them if they are beginners or pre-intermediate. If it is very difficult and we try with pictures, we try with videos, we try with cognates, we try with different strategies and they don't get it. So we might allow ourselves to use Spanish at the moment to clarify the topic or clarify the idea to beginners or pre-intermediate. But we need to push them more and more each time so they use the language. Otherwise, they are going to choose Spanish because it's the easiest choice, it's the
We,
easiest way.
we have also
Teacher,
experienced.
that,
Sorry, sorry.
go ahead, Jairo, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to make 2 points, and I don't know what your positions and opinions and views about these ideas are, but I no one has ever said and no one has ever confirmed that a native speaker of English is a better teacher of English than a Colombian teacher, right? I mean, that's clear, and that there's no point for discussion. No one can claim that a native speaker of a language is a better language teacher than a Colombian teacher. But you need to have bilingual native teachers in a bilingual school. It's an asset. It makes a big difference. And once again, not so much in the classroom. Of course they do, but out of the classroom. I mean, it creates a complete different atmosphere on how natural and how logical it is to use English. One of the things that we have told our teachers is, before, when a student was talking to them in Spanish, as a strategy, teachers would say, I don't understand Spanish. Come on, you're Colombian. You do understand Spanish. I mean, don't tell students, I don't understand Spanish. What you should do is use strategies so that students understand that you do understand Spanish. The point is you want them to use English, which is a totally different story. That would be number one. So I just wanted to make that point. And second, what happens in bilingual schools is, talking about contents, some of the students have a harder time understanding mathematics in English than they would do in Spanish. So what has happened is parents are paying private lessons for the content in Spanish. That has led to students not paying attention in the lesson when he's studying English. They know somebody's going to explain in Spanish. That's one more example on how, yes, using English for a non-native speaker of a language, it's harder. They have to make an effort, okay? It's a challenge. But if you open windows, I mean, if you open doors for students to understand that they can do it in Spanish, or somebody else is going to explain later on in Spanish, that's a killer for the process. I just wanted to add that.
Okay. Yes, I understand your idea. Um, well, some immersion schools have teachers teaching science or math who have traveled and have got like more knowledge of the language abroad. And from my point of view, I think that the positive thing about having native speakers in an immersion school is that their accent is something that will help the students to get a better pronunciation. If we are English teachers, that we might have some, let's say, different accent than a native person. So by giving the students the opportunity to listen to natives, we are giving them the opportunity to recognize those accents that are from native people. That I would say that would be like the important thing about having native teachers at an immersion school. But in terms of content, so Colombian teachers could do it. Catalina.
Actually, the bilingual schools are demanding to have native speakers from other countries. So, for example, I remember when I was in school, most of my teachers spoke English. They didn't speak Spanish because what I think is that also it's the problem of the teacher that they become lazy. It's easier for a teacher, of course, to explain Spanish if they speak Spanish, and they don't do the effort to manage to explain in English, whether it's with images, pictures, whatever they are thinking about. They need to be like more creative to get to the student
Ya
and
casi.
to explain to the student. I think it's more like a lazy point of most of the teachers when they have that challenge and they're not willing to take it.
Hmm. And it is a big challenge when you teach beginners. That's that requires a lot of your patience, patience and also effort and energy because you need to do more things. With advanced students, you can like talk and express your ideas and that they are going to understand faster than beginners, of course. So the effort will be bigger with beginners than with other students that know more the language. So I would like to know Alejandra's opinion about the idea of using Spanish in a class.
Yes.
How, yes, Alejandra.
In my case, in my school is similar to the school of the Jairo, but I think the most important thing is that people speak the same language, that the people try to use the predominant language, but without forgetting their original language, and also to develop the ability or skill communication to speak another language, but in this real context. But it's different learning only vocabulary and only some specific sentences on some specific topics and don't feel the need to use in the real life. For example, in my school, I work with students that first grade, and it is the beginner level. And but some instruction of some topic is necessary. Okay, say some example in English when they don't understand, but when after this example, if they don't understand, I need to talk in Spanish because it's difficult to they understand me. But after that, I said some example, and I think that that understand or talk other language, it's impossible to learn if you put this language with a mandatory, because it's more important that the people, or in this case the child, use the second language, use other language for necessity. If they feel the necessity of talk in English, and in my case, I motivate to talk in English when I say that told me in English or ask me something in English or reading in English or for some instruction, but not with a mandatory if more a necessity.
But anyway, you work for an immersion school, so students that are enrolled in those schools and continue studying there, they know they are there because they are gonna learn English, and if they keep studying there, it's because they want to do the effort to continue with the classes, 50% of classes in English. Some students just don't give up with those schools and need to go to a different place, a different school where English is taught, but not in the same way as in an immersion school. Do you guys have more comments about code switching?
No, teacher.
No, teacher.
No, teacher.
I just wanted to tell you before we finish that there are some students at the program, in your program, who are carrying out a study about the benefits of using Spanish in an English class. And they actually measured students' English by grading their performance after at the end of the classes. And what they found out is that the students that were not allowed to use Spanish performed better than the students that were allowed to use Spanish to come up with a task at the end of the lesson. So the ones that use Spanish to prepare the task didn't do better than the ones that were not allowed to use the Spanish. So it's just one study, but there are other studies that like show the benefits, the advantages and disadvantages of giving the students the opportunity to use the mother tongue during the language lesson. So that's something that is very connected with what we do in class, and it's for all of us to reflect about like the amount of English and Spanish that we use and that we allow students to use in class. Good. Questions before we finish?
No, teacher, everything's clear. Thank you.
No, teacher.
Okay, good. So thanks for your participation. We'll see you again next week.
All right, teacher. Thanks, teacher.
Thank you.
Thank you.